Started. I love that we have just a handful of people with us on the live call. If you're watching the recorded version of this, I encourage you to join us live next time. If you have the ability, this is where you can ask questions. This is where you're going to be able to get access directly with me. So I encourage anybody who's watching this recording to join us next month on our Masterclass Live series as well. So today we're talking about conquering fear. And before we dive deep into that, I want to take a few minutes just to introduce me. For those of you who don't know, my name is Bonnie Kelly. I am your master coach. I like to say that I'm a Mind Fu master. I help you get out of your way and on with your life through teaching you practical and skills and tools to master your mind. So for those of you who don't know much about my story, fear was something that I had struggled tremendously with. And so throughout this presentation today, I want to challenge you to see where fear first really got a hold of you. Now, fear, as we're going to learn today, is a normal emotion. It is something that we all struggle with. It's something that you're always going to struggle with. But today we're going to learn how to change that relationship with fear so it no longer becomes a paralyzer. Rather, it becomes something that we can use to guide and navigate our decisions and behaviors. And when you know the definition of emotional intelligence, that's really what it is. It's to use your emotions to guide and navigate behavior versus overreacting. Well, emotional intelligence is a skill that all of us need to learn. You are an emotional being. The trouble is that you've grown up in a very unemotional world, a world that knows all too well how to shut down, numb out, and tune out our emotions. But have you ever asked yourself, to what cost? What is the cost of not having a healthy, functioning relationship to our emotions? Because when we don't have that, there is a cost. And that cost can be detrimental to our production, to our well-being, to our ability to relate, for our ability to have intimacy. So this is where we have to take that responsibility. I always say it's not your fault, and it is your responsibility. It's not your fault why you might struggle to have a healthy, functioning relationship with your emotional well-being. Right? That is because we don't have the skills. We don't have the training. We didn't learn it. We haven't been able to acquire it. But it is because it is your responsibility. So when I mentioned that fear used to just plague my life, it did in such a huge way. So if you haven't had a chance to read my book, it's called True to Your Core. You get to actually grow up in the life of Bonnie Kelly, and I explain to you how all my dysfunction and the trauma that I experienced in my life shaped and molded the way that I perceived my reality. So if you can imagine that from a very early age is that I lost my real father. And as a result of that, we grew up having to refer to him as Mr. Nobody. And we were told Mr. Nobody doesn't love us anymore. Now think of the emotional ramifications of that. The truth is mom and dad just went through a bad divorce and they were pissed at each other, right? That's the reality, okay? But as a 5-year-old girl, what I hear is that dad's no longer here. I don't even know his name. We have to call him Mr. Nobody, and he doesn't love us anymore. So all of a sudden, this pain is so powerful that my fear is going to step in to protect me. My fear is saying, we don't want to feel this again, and thus we begin to build walls. Now you flash forward a few more years and the sexual abuse starts. Now from there, that pain and that betrayal is thickening those walls around my heart. And so now you have somebody who's learning very well how to numb out. And when fear gets activated, her fight, flight, and freeze is going to kick into overdrive, and she's going to go into a defensive stance to protect herself the best way she can. Now, after much understanding of myself, I know that I'm a fighter, okay? I will go to fight. If I feel threatened, right, if there's a lion that jumps into this room, I am going to be the one picking up the stick and trying to fight this thing off, okay? Maybe not the greatest plan, but it's my plan, right? Some of you are going to see if you can outrun it. Some of you are going to try to outsmart it by hiding from it. Some of you are just going to freeze and be paralyzed, because of the fear. So we have to know where we go when fear becomes present. But we also have to recognize that it's these past experiences. It's through our past experiences that have shaped and conditioned how you relate to your fear and how you allow your fear to control your decisions and behaviors as adults. Now, again, flash forward to where I'm at now, and anybody who knows me knows that that fear is not something that is a paralyzer in my life anymore. It isn't a paralyzer. I have a very healthy relationship to that with some of the skills that I'm going to teach you guys today. So I'm going to actually share my screen with you, and we are going to kind of dive deep into this material. Now, there's quite a bit of material for us to cover today. However, we are going to just stick to the basics. We got 60 minutes to do it in, and this is going to be interactive. So if you haven't found the chat box yet, the chat box, you can actually, if you move your mouse up near the top of your screen, for some of you, you might want to exit full screen, or you're going to find the little icon or drop down that is going to allow you to open a chat box, and that's where you can ask questions or you can add a comment throughout this presentation. So try to locate that now if you can. So I can actually stop the share really quick. It's easier to find when I stop it. Do you see where the chat box is now? Click it so you can have it open. Has everybody got it? All right. Now I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, which may make it a little harder to find. Okay, let's go. So as we're getting started in this, the first thing I like to remind everybody is to remove any distractions, all right? Is to be fully present with us right here, right now. Is this material can help you in conquering your fear. It can help you in changing the way that you relate to fear if you're willing to pay attention. So put the Facebook upside down, remove the cell phones, remove the distractions, and be here right now so you can get the most out of this presentation. So here's kind of what we're going to cover a little bit today. We're going to talk about conquering fear. We're going to dabble into the fight, flight, and freeze. And if we have time, we're going to dive into the fear versus faith. So if you didn't notice, this is actually coming right out of my year-long program. So we're going to take little tidbits from a section of my year-long program where I teach you to master yourself, including your subconscious mind. So has anybody seen the movie? I think it's oh my gosh, I can't think of the name. Where it's the new Disney Pixar movie where joy and fear and anger, can't remember, I think it's Inside Out. I think that's what it's called. It is a fantastic movie for adults, as well it is for children. I mean, the overarching point of that movie is for us to change our relationship to sadness and to fear and to anger, and to recognize that all of these emotions serve a purpose. Your fear, all right, is just a little piece of you. It's a little part of yourself. But it's when we allow that fear to control us is where it can become out of control. No different than anger. Right? I mean, there's a reason why we have anger management, is that we have to learn to manage our anger, to realize that being angry is normal, but how do you use that anger? Do you use that anger to get violent, to get loud, to get protective, to get defensive? And so there's been a lot of research and a lot of classes that are available on teaching anger management. But because fear happens to be self-deprivating, it doesn't get as much attention. However, it should, just like any emotion, right? I mean, sadness gets a lot of gets a lot of attention when it comes to depression and suicidal thoughts. But fear should get a little attention as well, because just like any of those other emotions, is when fear is present and unchallenged and unchecked, it can become the ruler of your decisions. So it can almost put you in a hypnotic trance. Right? And this is why, just like when, people get blacked out with rage and anger, they're in a trance. They actually don't have control over their behavior anymore. They don't have control over their decisions anymore. Well, I want you to realize that your fear, when it takes the driver's seat, is doing the same thing. And this is what could lead us to procrastinating or into a cycle of self-sabotage. Now, the funny thing is that fear is going to show up in a lot of different areas. It's going to show up in your life when you least expect it, when you get into a new relationship, when you take a new job, when you're applying for a new job. Fear could be present when you decide to go on a diet, when you struggle for the first time on that diet, when you buy a new car or a new house, or you take on any financial risk. You see, fear can always be present, and the louder it is, or the more that you've allowed over the decades to allow your fear to control you, that's what's going to lead us back to that cycle of procrastination, avoidance, shutting down, defensiveness, and then it can lead us into destruction. So as we're diving into this, the very, very first thing that I want you to know is that your fear is normal. I think that anger, fear, sadness all get a bad rap, when the truth is that these are normal emotions. These are normal emotions that we experience. They serve a purpose. But if we don't know what that purpose is, then we are going to hide behind it in our ignorance. You do not want to hide in ignorance, right? Knowledge is power. We need to understand, what is the purpose of this fear? What purpose does it serve right now in helping you avoid and stay stuck? The truth is, it's probably trying to protect you. It's trying to protect you from feeling less than, from feeling you're not capable, from feeling you can't do it, from feeling like a failure or feeling weak. And because it's so blinded by its purpose to protect you, it's not taking into consideration all of the other possibilities of you being capable, of you being able to do it, of you having the skills and the resources. But it is just so laser focused on protecting, it won't look at the whole picture. So you have to realize that the fear is normal. And you need to begin to start questioning, what is its purpose? Why is it rearing its head right now? What am I afraid of truly? And when you get to that, you're going to realize that there's a lot of assumptions that are associated with that fear. A ton of assumptions. Now, before I break into this section, I want to ask you, do you know the definition of assumption? Yeah, I know that one, right? The make an ass of you and me. That's not the one I'm talking about. So the real definition of an assumption is it's something that you accept as certain or factual, right? Certain or true to happen without proof, no evidence. So it's something you accept as true or certain to happen without proof. Now, I'm emphasizing this because I want you to realize that your fear is fueled by assumptions. It's fueled by assumptions. And when you start to recognize that, that means that this is just a story. It is just a story that is focused on the worst case scenario. You're going to realize that, wait a minute, who's the author here? Who's the author? Who's making up the story in the mind? It's you. So we have to realize that the fear is making assumptions, and the assumption it's going to make is the worst case scenario. It is going to absolutely go to the extreme negative of death, of complete failure, of you becoming homeless, of you never being loved again, of you looking like a complete idiot in front of everybody you know, right? So why does the brain do that? Well, it's because of the negative brain bias. Now, a negative brain bias is just your brain's natural way to protect itself. It will record and restore negative experiences over a positive one. So what it's going to do is just the way that the brain processes information is that it's going to assume the worst as a way to protect you. Okay? So this is kind of my definition of the negative brain bias. It says, in other words, something very positive will generally have less of an impact on a person's behavior and cognition, I can never say that word, than something equally emotional but negative. The negative brain bias has been investigated within many different domains, including the formation of impressions and general evaluations, attention, learning, and memory, and decision-making and risk consideration. So basically all this jargon, what it's saying is that your brain is naturally hardwired, okay? It's just naturally hardwired to remember, retain, record, and restore a negative experience over a positive one, period. So if you think about this, right? If I asked you right now, I said, all right, I want you to close your eyes and see if you can recall 10 negative experiences that you've had in your past that really caused you emotional pain. I bet you can recall 10 experiences very rapidly without much depth into the thinking. But then if I said, okay, now I want you to remember 10 times where you've laughed so hard you almost peed your pants. And I bet you would have to dig deeper in those filing cabinets. You'd have to really think about it. You probably can come up with a couple really quick, but 10 would be a serious challenge. Now, it doesn't mean you haven't had that kind of joy. It doesn't mean you haven't had that kind of love and laughter. What it means is that that information the brain is saying is irrelevant and thus filing it in the back of the cabinet, whereas the negative ones, it feels is life-threatening, right? Very relevant. It puts in the forefront in the mind. This is a good example of this, ladies, if you've ever curled your hair, right? And if you've ever dropped the curling iron and attempted to catch it and you burnt yourself, I bet that only happened once. Because now if the curling iron slips, what do? Right? We jump back. We're like, nope, let it fall. And why are we like that? Well, because we know, the brain knows, it's recorded that if you try to catch said hot falling curling iron, you get burnt. And so the body responds without our even cognitive thinking. We don't even have to think about it. So you have to realize that your negative brain bias is just your brain's default conditioning. Hear that? Default conditioning to protect you. Now, I say to protect you, but I didn't say to serve you, okay? So it will protect you, but it doesn't serve your happiness. It doesn't serve your higher good. It doesn't serve your taking risk. It doesn't serve trusting in your capabilities and abilities. It will only focus on the times that you failed or that you were embarrassed or that you were wrong and not take into consideration everything else. And so because it's only focused on that, it'll paralyze you from taking action in facing that dragon again, right? And I say facing a dragon is kind of like when we're facing our challenges. All right, let's see. So the biggest thing to know, okay, is that your fear is naturally going to be based on the worst case scenario, but it's going to be based on a story that you personally made up, right? Your brain is making up a fictional story to protect you. Here's the truth. We have to realize that that story that your brain has concocted is a possible outcome. It's possible. Right? That could happen, that extreme negative. But it's not the only thing, the only possible future. And we're going to talk about that in a second because, you know, the biggest way to challenge your fear is to give it reasonable answers. And a lot of times we don't reason with our fear. We try to just numb it out or stomp it out or protect ourselves from it. And that's not going to work. Right? We have to learn to change the relationship to the fear, knowing that your fear is always going to be present. Okay? It's big, big here. So this is just to realize that it's this negative story is going to give you negative results. If you allow that unchallenged negative story to dominate the mind, it's going to dominate your results. If you stop at the worst case scenario, if you stop at that negative, story, then your brain is going to say it's not worth the risk. Don't do it. Don't speak up. Don't ask them out. Don't go on that date. Don't take that job. Don't fill out that application. You're only going to fail. You're never qualified. It's never going to work. Why are you trying? And the result is going to match the story. Okay? So we have to realize that that fear is going to drive the decisions. This is where we can start looking for clues. This is where we can start looking for clues. Now, if you're a student of mine, then you know there's two parts of the brain that we're always talking about. We have the unconscious mind, the subconscious, and we have the conscious mind. Well, your thoughts, feelings, and actions can be traced and tracked in the conscious mind. Your auto default programming, like where those thoughts came from in the first place, is all going to emanate from your subconscious mind. Now, to truly conquer fear, we have to transform the beliefs and the programs in the unconscious mind. But we're not going to get into that today. Okay, that's a much deeper conversation that I encourage anybody who's watching this to take with me, to have a conversation with me about seeing if we can change the default programming. Join my program, talk to my coaches, come see me live, whatever it is, that's what we really need to do. But for right now, we need to change the outer relationship with how we're relating to our fear. And we do that through tracing and tracking the conscious mind. So the conscious mind is if you stopped right now and you just, for a moment, scanned your thoughts, you could capture them. You could capture your thoughts. If you tuned in, you could identify, what are you feeling? Maybe you're feeling curious right now. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed with the information. Maybe you're feeling frustrated because I haven't given you solutions yet. Maybe you're feeling tired because you didn't get enough sleep. Maybe you're feeling bored. I don't know, right? Like where, if you tune in though, you could identify that because these exist in the conscious realm, means that they're easily accessed, right? That you can access them very easily. Now the action is actually probably the easiest thing to identify because that's a behavior, right? That's our bad habits. This is where we're avoiding, procrastinating, where we're shut down, we're numb, we're defensive, we're protective. That's the result, the action. But when we begin to pay attention to these, we realize that your thoughts, feelings, and actions are leaving clues to how your fear is controlling you. And when you can begin to start to pay attention to when fear is surfacing and what fear is telling you, what is the story, that's the thought, that the fear is telling your mind? And what kind of feeling is coming up as a result of that worst case scenario? And then how do you behave? How do you behave as a result of that negative worst case scenario that your fear is telling your mind, that is driving the way that you feel, and in result, it is driving the actions that you're having? These are clues. And when we can follow those clues, that's when we can begin to reason with our minds. So to change the result, right? So if you want to stop avoidance, if you want to stop call reluctance, if you want to stop procrastinating, if you want to stop, being so reactive, then we need to follow the clues. We need to start with identifying what it is that we're thinking and what story is being told so we can change it there. Now, for my true Mind Fu masters, you know that that's still only half of the equation. Eventually, you need to go deeper and figure out how this fear is rooted in your unconscious or subconscious minds. So as I mentioned, the result, could look like avoidance, procrastination, shrinking, playing small, giving your power away, hiding, or lacking. Now, these are usually more introverted. There, like I said, fear can also drive more extroverted, which is defensiveness, arrogance, protectiveness, reactiveness. Those are more they're usually pushing or blaming, other people and defending and protecting ourselves, right? It's where you pull your emotional sword out to defend yourself. And when we get into the fight, flight, and freeze, that'll make more sense. But a lot of people are just going to put up the shield and hide behind the shield, right? And those are my avoiders and procrastinators and shrinkers. So you have to realize, though, but doing that, it's going to have a negative impact on your finances, on your relationships, on your friendships, and on your lifestyle. If you do not learn to reason with your fear, if you do not learn to have a different relationship with your fear, you will continue to be the victim of it. It will control you. And you're going to continue to get the results that you don't desire. You are not watching this. You did not show up here today. You did not sign up for this today because you don't want to change. That's what I'm trying to say. You're here on purpose. There's something that you want to change within you. There's something you want to change about you, and that requires you to be willing to look at you and see how you are allowing or participating in this cycle. Like, where are you shrinking? Where are you allowing your fear to control you, and why? What is the purpose? So again, if we change the way that the story is told, we have different results. And that's ultimately where we're going to go now. So to start with that, you have to realize that there's an old way of you doing things, and there's got to be a new way for you to do things, right? Change requires, change. You have to change something. You have to change the way you think. You have to change the way you feel. You have to change the way you behave. You have to change how you look at it, change how you know about it. You have to change something. If you don't add a new ingredient to the recipe, you'll get the same result. If you want a different result, you need to add a new ingredient. Well, this is where examining how you have done things is going to be very helpful, because you need to know what recipe you've been operating on up until this point. So if you're watching the replay, pause here. Well, after I say the question. If you're listening live, I want you to ask yourself this question, okay? When fear is present, how do I behave? When fear is present, how do I behave? Write yourself a note. I want you to think about that. So again, if you're watching the replay, pause and answer that question. So when fear is present, how do I behave? We need to understand the old way. How did you behave? What were the ingredients in your recipe list? Sorry about that. What are the ingredients in the recipe list? Sorry about that. So we need to understand how you did things so we know we can do something different. And then once we've examined that, now we can apply some of the skills and tools that I'm about to teach you to help you do it differently. So after following the clues to your fear, it's time to reason with your irrational self. Now, as I mentioned, your fear isn't always going to be reasonable. In fact, your fear is going to be very irrational. Again, it's fixated only on the worst case scenario, and it's not taking into consideration anything else except for the negative experiences that you've had or the pitfalls that you've experienced. Again, it's okay to be afraid. The worst thing that I hear in the personal development world is people saying to just completely stomp out fear, don't ever get angry, that don't ever be judgmental, don't ever, and the truth is that you're human. You're an emotional being, feeling sad, feeling shame, feeling fear, feeling depressed, feeling anger, feeling bitterness. Like, all of these emotions are normal. It is okay to feel. What's not okay is to vomit your feelings all over other people. What's not okay is to not take responsibility for your feelings and shame and blame them all over other people. What's not okay is that we take that fear And we don't process that emotion, and we allow that emotion to control our decisions and behaviors. So we have to take responsibility. We have to recognize that it's normal for you to feel afraid. What you're trying might be risky, right? There is a risk. There is something that your mind is saying, like, there's danger, a threat is present. Okay, thank you. We need to be aware that that fear is serving a purpose, and then choose to have a different relationship with it. So again, I say fear is normal. Like, if you are walking into somebody's yard and there's an aggressive dog that has gnarly teeth that comes charging at you, and you just have the instinct to run, thank you, fear, right? Like, that served a heck of a great purpose. So that is a natural emotion to feel under a threatening situation. Where your fear will fool you is that it has a hard time distinguishing the difference between a perceived threat and an actual one. Your mind is going to respond to the perceived threat of failure with the same amount of intensity as it would if you actually failed. See, this is what we have to begin to reason with. This is where it's not being reasonable, or it's not being rational. This is where your fear is consuming and controlling you in a way that does hinder and limit your success. Okay, so as I mentioned, though, this is where your fear is going to get out of control. And when your fear is out of control, it's going to make a mess. All right, if you haven't seen this movie yet, I highly recommend it. I love these slides. I totally borrowed them for this whole presentation because, to me, it is so relevant to recognize that, when fear in that movie or even anger gets out of control, I mean, they make a mess. They go ballistic. They just freak out and nothing productive happens. And there's so much truth to that when we're honest with ourselves, when we're honest about when fear is present, how do you respond? Because when fear is present, it is going to be out of control. And that's what's going to drive the results, okay? Is that when it's out of control. So I love this quote. I found this slide. It says, never let your fear decide your future. Don't let it decide your future. Allow it to contribute to the decision you make about your future, but don't let it be the only deciding factor in your future. Whatever that is that you're afraid to do right now, whatever that thing is you're afraid to achieve or to speak up about, don't allow your fear to be the driving force of that decision. You let it be a warning or contributing factor to, but not the only decider of. It is so important. So here's some of my steps. So if you're taking notes, this is where you're going to want to take them. If I end up moving too fast, know that you will get the replay for this soon. And with the replay, you guys can pause this as you will. So the first thing to do, so now we're going to talk about how we can conquer our fear a little bit better. And the first thing we do is we need to ask ourselves, what are you afraid of right now? We need to tune in, right? Why is fear present? Like, what am I afraid of right now? Am I afraid of failing? Now, and it's not just I'm afraid that that person's going to hurt me, okay? So let's dig a little deeper than that. Okay, what am I really afraid that they're going to hurt me? Well, I'm afraid that they're going to abandon me. I'm afraid that they're going to violate my trust. I'm afraid that they're going to, leave me hanging again. I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to recover from them. See if you can take it deeper. From whatever the initial response is, see if you can take it deeper and asking truly, what are you afraid of? So number 2 is could it seem actually a little bit maybe opposite of what most people will tell you, but this is such a very powerful step, is that you need to acknowledge and thank your fear. Let me explain why. All right. A lot of times what will happen is that we dismiss our fear or we make our fear wrong. But again, your fear serves a purpose. That purpose is to protect you. So instead of being angry that your fear is getting the best of you, instead of being frustrated that you're, stuck in this cycle of self-sabotage again, instead of being sad that you're dealing with this all over again, let's thank our fear. It's doing its job. It's doing exactly what fear is supposed to do, and it's to protect you from threat, protect you from being hurt, protect you from whatever. And again, it's not your fear's fault that it doesn't know the difference between a perceived threat and an actual threat. That's our responsibility to discern the difference between. So we want to thank our fear. We really want to say, oh my gosh, okay, my fear is just trying to protect me. It's afraid that I'm going to get hurt. It's afraid that I'm going to fail. It's afraid that I can't do it. It's afraid or whatever. Okay, thank you, fear. I hear you. I hear you. I know what your purpose is, and I appreciate that. Then from there, we can challenge it. So what we can challenge it with is other evidence that it's not considered yet. So after we say, thank you, fear, I know that you're just trying to protect me from being hurt. However, this is a new person, and this is a new situation, and I'm a new person. I have these new skills. I have these new tools. I'm more aware. I'm willing to use my voice more, whatever it is. And so we can start to challenge that fear and say, yeah, but I've got this. And let me tell you the reasons why I've got this. And you need to list them out. So you need to challenge the fear and putting into the mix all of the things that the fear hasn't considered yet. So as I mentioned earlier, your fear is so laser focused on protecting you, it's not considering the big picture. It's not looking at all the other elements of how, qualified you are and how capable you are and how resilient you are and how this person is different or how you are different or how the situation is different. So after we thank our fear, we need to broaden its horizon, help it see the bigger picture, to realize that there's more going on than just that threat. So we can then take a step back and have a different experience. All right, so lastly is that you calm your fear. Now, how do you calm your fear? Well, you can use a tapping technique, all right? And if you're not familiar with tapping, go on to YouTube and Google it. You can find it actually on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday. She talks about it. It's a really powerful technique to be able to calm and to change the way that our brain is processing information. And it's simply just using what is called acupressure. All right, so this is where we're touching certain areas to be able to stimulate different parts of the brain to send a different signal to the mind. Deep breathing is another way to calm your fear, by just taking slow, controlled breath. And when I say slow, controlled breath, I actually mean where you're breathing in to a count of 3, pause for a count of 3, exhale to a count of 3. I mean, just do that one time with me right now. Take a deep breath. 1, 2, 3, pause, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3. One more. Inhale, 2, 3, pause, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3. Do you feel yourself just relax just with that? Your breath is such a powerful gift you can give to your mind and your body. Just breathing is a great way to calm your fear. Now, in addition to that, reassurance can calm your fear as well. So, your fear might just need some reassurance that you got this, that you are capable, that you are qualified, that you can do it, right? So that could just be affirmations as well. So you get to decide how you choose to calm your fear. Okay, so this next section we're going to fly through really quickly. We're going to briefly talk about fight, flight, and freeze just because of where we're at with time. And I want to make sure to open it up for questions for anybody who's actually on our live call as well. So just a reminder, fear is normal, okay? It's a normal response. And again, fear is provoking your primal responses. So this is your primal, right? This means that this is back to your caveman, fight, flight, and freeze. This goes back to you protecting and defending and trying to survive. As I mentioned, some of you are like me. You're going to be fighters. When a threat is present, you're going to charge at it face first. This is why the first question I asked you, the very first question I asked, is that I wanted to know, how does your fear show up for you? How does your fear show up for you? You could be a flighter. Now, again, fighters are going to be the people who are defensive. All right. So these are the ones that are going to get protective. They're going to pull out the sword in a conversation. My flighters are the people who are just going to want to run and hide. You are the person who says, I can't take this. I'm not capable of doing this. I can't handle this. Like, I don't want to deal with this right now. And you just shut down conversations. You walk away. You also are going to find yourself you'll run even in your own minds, but you tend to just avoid. You're just going to avoid, right? You're going to distract yourself with something else. You're going to keep yourself busy with something else. My freezers, on the other hand, are going to shut down completely. You're going to numb out. You are going to, you'll be in a conversation and your mind goes completely blank. You don't feel anything. You don't hear anything. You don't see anything. You're just blah. Right? So this is your protection mechanism. You're just going to freeze. And this is how you protect yourself, is that you just numb out. You feel nothing. So it doesn't matter what they say or do, you do not feel. All right? So this goes back to really asking yourself, all right, how do you respond? Because how you're responding means that there's a flag on the play. These are your warning signs. For me, when I get defensive, right, when I take a defensive stance, I got my hands on my hip, I'm trying to protect myself, that is a flag on the play. It says, warning, Bonnie, your fear has got the best of you. You are in reaction. And this is where I have to take the responsibility into backing off, into having a different response. So how do you respond? How do you respond? Do you go to flight and fight or freeze? So there's another one that sometimes is talked about as well, which is appease, okay? So appease are the people pleasers. You're constantly trying to fix it. But sometimes that's usually the appeasers that's usually result when you're not the one being threatened, okay? So I want to know, how do you respond when you're threatened? When your mind perceives a threat, and that threat could be as something as just perceiving that you're inadequate, you're not enough, you're unworthy, you're unlovable, you don't matter. How do you respond? So here's the couple steps to talk about this. So when you're threatened, all right, so I want to make sure you guys understand that this fight, flight, and freeze is your primitive response. We have to know the old game. The old game, so you can add a new ingredient for a new game. And that's what we're talking about here. So number one, when you're threatened, are you a fight, flight, or freeze? Where do you go? How do you respond? Do you immediately get defensive? Do you just run away from it? I don't want to deal with this right now. I can't handle you right now. Or do you freeze, where you just completely numb out? How do you respond? Because this is going to tell you how that you're going to react and respond in every relationship. It's going to be at work. It's going to be with your finances, because there's an old saying that how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you tend to be a fighter, that in fear, when fear is present, you might be a fighter when fear is present when you're talking about the budget, when you're talking about what school your children need to go to. Number two, how do you behave when you are in a reaction? So this is really intimate to you, and this is where you have to know you, okay? You absolutely have to know you. For me, right, when I get into a fight, I go into a protective stance. That means my hands will sometimes go on my hips, my arms will cross, and I go into self-protection, right? I know this about me. And thus that allows me to know when there's a flag on the play, when I'm in reaction. If you're not aware of that, then you're going to bypass the warning signs and you're going to go into a reaction, which will probably have a consequence for you. Okay. So for example, if you're in avoidance, how do you know you're in avoidance? What are your warning signs? How do you know? Because if you continue to stay in avoidance, what's the consequence? Well, things aren't getting done on time. You might get fired. You might not, have success. Your bank accounts might go low. I don't know. What is the consequence for that? Okay. All right. So let's go back here to the next question. So you need to know, how do you respond? How do you respond when you're in reaction? Next, how do you feel after you've reacted? Again, the purpose is to know the old you. We have to know the old way that you behave and respond. So after you reacted, do you have shame? Do you have guilt? Do you feel remorse? Do you feel defensive? Do you feel sad? Do you feel grief? Do you feel depressed? Do you feel angry or bitter? How do you feel after you've reacted? Next, what warning signs do you display prior to the reaction? This is so important, okay? My avoiders, you might clean your baseboards or clean out your garage as a way of avoiding having that difficult conversation. Do you become all of a sudden a neat freak when you're actually irritated, when you're avoiding saying something or doing something? Do you displace it with frustration, that emotion? Do you go shopping to feel better? Like, what are the warning signs when fear is present? Because as I said, these are the flags. And when we can start to understand when our fear is present ahead of time, we can reason with it and have a different relationship with it altogether. Number 5, what is the most important thing you need to learn about yourself and how you react to threats? This is a really powerful question. What is the most important thing you need to learn about yourself and how you react to threats? As I mentioned multiple times, the goal is to evaluate the old you. We have to evaluate how you've played the game to see how you can have a different reaction. And change requires change. But you can't change if you're unaware of what needs to be changed in the first place. So you have to be aware of what is it that you need to change about you. What do you need to learn? What do you need to learn specifically about how you react to threats when your fear is present? What do you need to learn about you so you can change the recipe and thus change the results? Okay, so as I mentioned, we didn't really have time to dive into the fear versus faith today, but this is how you begin to start conquering your fear, is that you have to begin to realize where and how you respond to threats. How is your brain being irrational? And begin to start to reason with your fear, like what we talked about with those questions in that first section, to allow you to have a different result. Okay, so we have about 9 minutes left. I would love to hear from everybody who's on my live call today and hear about your big takeaway with your fear, or a question that you have, or something specifically you're working on that you might need some coaching on. So who has a question? You can unmute yourself or a comment. Otherwise, I'm just going to randomly select you. Okay. All right. So Amy Jagger, let's start with you. What's your big takeaway, or what's your big nugget? Did you, looks like Karen answered what your step 3 is that you missed. Amy, can you hear us?
Yes.
Hi, what's your big takeaway today? Or question you have?
I, I think just really being aware of, I'm definitely a freezer, and I think I've noticed I'm more of a freezer because of aggressive people.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it really depends on the situation and the person and all of that with me.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had situations with very aggressive, self-serving people. So in those situations, I just freeze because
The
I
perceived
just
threat of
can't relate
danger.
to people
Yeah.
that react that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
that's the perceived threat, right? So, like when we really begin to ask ourselves, so people who are being aggressive, and I hope I'm right on this one, but what are really the chances of them taking physical violence, of hurting you? It's probably, hopefully, pretty
oh
slim.
no, not yeah, not
Okay,
physical at all. I'm just
right.
talking very
Well,
verbal,
but still,
emotional, mental.
when the brain perceives a threat, right, the brain's going to take it to extreme, that if they're that aggressive, that they're going to take it to that kind of extreme. That's a lot of times where the mind might go when you're having the reaction of just completely shutting down. But now this goes back to some of our mind food training, and I love Amy's one of my students, so I'm going to challenge her a little bit harder here. Is that constant reminder that no one can hurt you without your permission. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you say. You could call me the most heinous things in the world, and it's still my choice to be offended by that or not. It's my choice to feel hurt by that or not, to be threatened by that or not. So where I think there's some room for growth here, Amy, is to really recognize that aggressive people, that sometimes that's just the only way they know how to communicate, where they feel heard, and they're not actually they're not posing a threat at all. And when we
Right.
can
And I
realize,
totally,
go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, I totally get that. And,
Mm-hmm.
people project kind of their own stuff
Yeah.
on.
Oh, yeah.
That
So,
I understand, but I also, for myself, it's like,
mhm.
why would I put myself in
Well,
that
that was
situation?
the other part I was gonna say. So you guys, what part that I didn't finish on there is to also know that you don't need to put up with emotional abuse, right? Like you could totally exit that conversation anytime that you want, because it's not acceptable for people to be, mentally or verbally abusive in any way. But the truth is, 90% of people who are that way aren't even aware that they are that way in the first place, right? And so this is where we give them the benefit of the doubt. However, you can't reason with someone if you're in a reaction, right? You can't reason with them if you can't even reason with yourself. So this is where, when we can conquer our fear, we have an opportunity to say something to that might be able to shift that dynamic, to allow them to have a different way of interacting with you. So for example, because I've dealt with my fair share of really, nasty people in my lifetime, I'm sure you guys know, but one of the things that, I'll often do is that if you're in a reaction, right, you're not in a place to be able to challenge or to help other people become aware that their behavior is that way in the first place. And so what I've had to do in the past is that after I've worked through my stuff, is say, hey, I know it's not your intention to come across really abusive right now. However, the way that you're talking to me is very demeaning and it feels very abusive. If you're not able to change that tone, I am going to walk away from this conversation. Now that puts that other person in this different space. And it's funny, their first reaction typically is, I'm not being abusive. You're just taking it personal, right? They'll go back to blame. And you can say, well, I can understand that that's your perception. However, I'm over here feeling attacked. Is there a better way you can communicate with me right now? Or do we need to take a timeout? So what I'm saying is that, Amy, is that once we can conquer that fear where you're not shrinking, you're not shutting down, you can face that dragon. And you can face that dragon in a way that is love and strength and kindness, to assert a boundary where it says, like, that behavior is not acceptable with me. And so now we can retrain or recondition other people on how to behave with you, how to respond with you in a way that is going to ultimately serve your highest good. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I've done that to a certain extent, not as good as you just explained, but I'm practicing and learning.
It takes practice. It takes practice. And again, right, there also comes a point where you can just say, I'm done. Right? Where you can just get to a point and say, like if you're not able to control your temper, if you're not able to control what you're saying right now, I'm going to need to call a timeout. And, if we can't come to middle ground on how we communicate, then I'm not going to want to communicate with you anymore. And being okay with just Xing people from your life as well. You guys, look, everybody's on a path. And some people have been hurt and conditioned to be on a very destructive path. It doesn't mean that they're not worthy of love. It doesn't mean that they're not worthy of grace. It just means that they have been so hurt that they're out there hurting the world. And you get to decide whether or not that you can or want to be able to interact with that person. And sometimes it's not worth it. And it's okay, I don't care who they are, even if they're related, for you to say, snip, goodbye. Okay? So, because this is your joy and your happiness that's on the line. And ultimately, you get to decide who gets to disrupt your happy bubble or not. Does that help at all, Amy?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Bonnie.
Oh, you're always welcome, sunshine. Okay, so anybody else? Question, comment, real time mojo you want to work through? So we have another Bonnie on the line. Hi, I love the name. Okay, so we have Bonnie, Becky, Donna, Shirley. Anybody have questions? I'm going to unmute everybody. Be mindful of your background noises. Okay, anybody, just speak now. Anybody, questions or comments? Okay, Becky, you're unmuted. Go ahead, darling.
I don't really have a question. Well, maybe I do. Depending on what the situation is, I can avoid, I can procrastinate, and I can freeze.
Yes.
But the freeze is more not, I don't experience that intimidation like I'm going to be physically harmed. It's more of an intellectual thing. So I guess the question in it for me would be, is it possible that you can do like a handful of different ones? You don't just have one reaction?
Yeah. Well, and it depends on the situation. It depends on what your brain is interpreting. For example, I will be more likely to have a freezing response if like a parental figure is shaming me versus, a fighting response if a peer is threatening me. Right? Okay. So it just depends on, the level of the threat, and it depends on the circumstances, and it depends on the person on how you're going to respond. And this is why I say you guys have to understand you, right? You have to understand you. And then the other part is like, it could be very specific. So what it sounds like, Becky, is that, what's going to get you to protect yourself is if somebody's attacking your competency, right? On whether or not you're smart enough. Okay. Now that was a huge one for me, right? Is that if my brain was perceiving you were calling me stupid, that's when my sword would come out, right? If you were perceiving that I was less than, or I was stupid, or I wasn't capable, my BS sword was going to come out, and I was going to start jabbing, and I was going to start saying, yeah, well, you're stupid, I'm smart, right? And then of course I'm having a total reaction, but that was a big one. Now, again, this ties back into the unconscious world. So when you dig a little bit deeper into the unconscious, well, that's where, for me, my core belief was that I was stupid. So of course that my fight, flight, and freeze was going to come out, because one of the most painful things that I believed about myself was that I was inadequate. And because I believed that about myself, I was going to be reactive to any threat of somebody validating that. And that's why I say that it's like from the thought, feeling, the conscious world, we need to dive into the unconscious, the subconscious layer, and understanding where there we might be, where in that area we might be struggling. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
You're so welcome. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments for anybody so far? Cool. Did you enjoy the class?
Yes.
I hope so. Good, guys. Okay, so as you guys know, here's my announcements for you, is that this is, hold on just a second. That this is our masterclass series. This is something that we're going to be doing for you guys every single, trying to actually get a copy of something right here. Multitasking, guys. Sometimes it doesn't always work. That this is something that we're going to do for you guys every single month, is we're going to do a 60-minute class on a different topic. We have 3 more that are coming available. If you have not, I'm assuming all have signed up for this, but if you want to share that, please do. You sign up once and you get access or reminders to all of those different classes. We have one coming up on the war of your worth, mastering your mindset. We have, I procrastinate no more is another one that we have coming up as well. So I really encourage you guys to share that out with anybody who's interested. And also, we are now in open enrollment. If you would like to learn more about our year-long program, about how I can help you completely transform from the inside out, we'd love to hear from you guys. I do have the calendar link in your chat box. So grab the chat box now. It is calendly.com/BonnieKelly/20minute. I see the request for the replay. The replay is going to be available most likely tomorrow. It's going to be uploaded today, and it'll be available. There should be an automatic email that's sent out tomorrow with a reminder saying it is available. And then also, thank you, Amy. So we have our Journey to Joy live. For any of you who have not been to one of my live events, this is a ultimate experience. We have speakers being flown in from all over the country. It is a 2-day live interactive transformation experience on your journey back to joy. It's going to be May 4 and 5 in Rockland, California. So it's just going to be right outside of Sacramento. If you are interested in grabbing tickets, early bird pricing is going to end in the next week, I believe it is. So make sure to grab that. It's going to be in the end of February to grab your ticket for that. All of it can be found on bonniekelly.me. And let's see, Amy, just call the office. We'll be happy to answer that question for you. But yes, yeah, we have the information on the back end as far as you and your friend being able to come to the class. So just make sure to call the office, and Cassie will get you the information to that and your tickets. And we just need to know who you're bringing. Okay, those were my announcements. I know they were quick. So if you want to take this conversation deeper, 20 minutes free with me, it's available there. If you want to join me for a live interactive experience, that's where you absolutely are going to need to join me for my 2-day live event. And again, bonniekelly.me is where you're going to find all the information for everything. Replay will be available to you tomorrow. Okay, that's it. So I wish you guys love. Mwah! Bye, guys. Make it a great day.